Sometimes the most ordinary moments become extraordinary without warning. A simple walk to the door, a routine security check, or an unexpected discovery can flip an entire life upside down. What happens when someone you trust completely becomes the very person standing between you and the truth? What happens when a single piece of evidence hidden for years suddenly surfaces at the worst possible moment? This is the story of Camilla Richardson, a 34-year-old marketing executive who thought she knew everything about her life until one Tuesday morning when everything she believed came crashing down. It's a story about secrets buried so deep they seemed forgotten, about loyalties tested beyond breaking point, and about how sometimes the people meant to protect us become the very ones we need protection from. In the span of just 5 days, Camilla would go from living a comfortable, predictable life to questioning every relationship, every memory, and every choice she had ever made. She would discover that the guard she passed every day at her office building held the key to a mystery that had haunted her family for over a decade. Most shocking of all, she would learn that sometimes the truth isn't hidden in some far-off place. Sometimes it's right there, just behind a door you're not allowed to open. What started as a blocked entrance would become a journey into the darkest corners of family secrets, corporate corruption, and personal betrayal. This is her story, raw, real, and absolutely true. Camilla Richardson adjusted her laptop bag on her shoulder as she approached the familiar glass doors of the Meridian Corporate Tower. The morning sun reflected off the building's sleek facade, creating dancing patterns of light that she had grown accustomed to seeing every Tuesday for the past 3 years. As a senior marketing coordinator for Blackstone Industries, she had her routine down to a science. Coffee at 7:30, arrive at the building by 8:15, and settle into her office on the 42nd floor by 8:30 sharp. But this Tuesday morning felt different from the moment she stepped out of her silver Honda Civic. The usual security guard, Marcus Williams, wasn't at his post behind the reception desk. Instead, a younger man with sharp features and an overly serious expression stood in his place. Camilla had never seen him before, which was unusual considering how well she knew the building staff after 3 years of daily interactions. "Good morning," she said cheerfully, holding up her building access card as she approached the turnstiles. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" The new guard looked up from his computer screen with cold, calculating eyes. "I'm going to need to see some identification." Camilla paused, slightly confused. Her access card had always been sufficient, and Marcus had never asked for additional identification beyond their initial introduction years ago. "My access card should be enough," she replied, maintaining her friendly demeanor. "I work on the 42nd floor for Blackstone Industries." "Not today," the guard responded curtly. "New security protocols. I need to see a driver's license and verify your employment status." Something in his tone made Camilla's stomach tighten with unease. She fumbled through her purse, retrieving her driver's license and employee identification card. The guard studied both items far longer than necessary, his eyes moving back and forth between the cards and her face multiple times. Other employees were beginning to queue behind her, and she could feel their impatience growing. "There seems to be an issue with your clearance," the guard announced after several uncomfortable minutes. "What kind of issue?" Camilla asked, her voice betraying her growing anxiety. "I've worked here for 3 years. There's never been a problem before." The guard turned his computer monitor slightly, shielding the screen from her view. His fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard, and she caught glimpses of red text appearing on the screen. "Your access has been temporarily suspended pending a security review." "A security review?" Camilla's voice rose an octave. "What are you talking about?" "I have a presentation to give at 9 o'clock. My team is expecting me." "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't allow you access to the building today. You'll need to contact your Human Resources Department for clarification." The word ma'am stung. Marcus had always called her Camilla, often asking about her weekend plans or commenting on her latest haircut. This sterile, official treatment felt wrong in every way. She pulled out her phone and dialed her supervisor's direct line, hoping to resolve what had to be some kind of administrative error. "Jennifer, it's Camilla," she said when her boss answered. "I'm downstairs, but there's some kind of security issue preventing me from coming up." "Camilla?" Jennifer's voice sounded strained, almost nervous. "I was just about to call you. We need to talk, but not over the phone. Can you meet me at the coffee shop across the street in 10 minutes? The line went dead before Camilla could respond. She stared at her phone, confusion and worry swirling in her mind like a brewing storm. Jennifer had never asked to meet her at a coffee shop. In 3 years of working together, all their conversations had taken place either in the office or during scheduled business lunches. Ma'am, the guard's voice cut through her thoughts. You need to move away from the entrance. Camilla looked around, suddenly aware that a small crowd of her colleagues had gathered near the turnstiles. Some were openly staring, while others whispered among themselves. She recognized Tom from accounting, Sarah from the legal department, and several others she had shared countless elevator rides with over the years. Their expressions ranged from curious to sympathetic, but none of them approached her or offered assistance. This is ridiculous, she muttered, stuffing her phone back into her purse. I'll be back once this gets sorted out. The guard's expression remained unchanged. Have a good day, ma'am. As Camilla walked toward the exit, she heard Tom from accounting whisper to Sarah, "Isn't she the one whose father used to work for Patterson Holdings?" Sarah's response was barely audible, but Camilla caught enough to make her blood run cold. Yeah, before all that business with the missing funds. Her father. The mention of her father in connection with missing funds sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning in the building's lobby. James Richardson had worked as a financial analyst for Patterson Holdings for 15 years before his sudden resignation 12 years ago. He had never talked about why he left, simply saying that it was time for a change and that he wanted to pursue consulting work. But Camilla remembered the months that followed his departure. The hushed phone conversations that ended abruptly when she entered the room. The way her mother's face would tighten whenever Patterson Holdings was mentioned on the news. The family's abrupt move from their spacious suburban home to a modest apartment across town. Her father had claimed it was about simplifying their lives, but even as a 22-year-old college student, she had sensed there was more to the story. The morning air felt sharp against her skin as she crossed the street to Brewster's coffee shop. Through the large windows, she could see Jennifer already seated at a corner table, nervously stirring a cup of coffee that was probably already cold. Jennifer Walsh had been Camilla's supervisor and mentor for 3 years, guiding her through complex marketing campaigns and celebrating her successes as if they were her own achievements. The woman sitting hunched over a coffee cup looked nothing like the confident, decisive leader Camilla knew. A bell chimed as Camilla entered the coffee shop, and Jennifer looked up with eyes that seemed to have aged years since their last conversation on Friday afternoon. Camilla, thank you for coming. Jennifer, what's going on? Why can't I get into the building? And what does my father have to do with anything? Jennifer gestured for her to sit down, her hands trembling slightly. There's no easy way to say this, so I'm just going to be direct. Yesterday afternoon, the FBI contacted our legal department. They're investigating financial irregularities at Patterson Holdings that apparently date back over a decade. The FBI? Camilla's voice was barely a whisper. Your father's name came up in their investigation. Not as a suspect, Jennifer added quickly, but as someone who might have had access to relevant information during his time there. The problem is that you never disclosed your father's employment history with Patterson Holdings when you were hired. Camilla felt the room spinning slightly. I didn't think it was relevant. He left that job years before I even applied here. And Blackstone Industries doesn't have any connection to Patterson Holdings, does it? Jennifer's pause lasted just a fraction of a second too long. It's complicated. Blackstone acquired several of Patterson's subsidiary companies about 5 years ago.
Technically, we're not the same company, but there are some overlapping interests. Are you firing me?
The decision came from above my pay grade, Jennifer said, avoiding direct eye contact.
Your employment has been suspended pending the completion of the FBI investigation. It's temporary, but we don't know how long it might take. Camilla sat in stunned silence, processing the rapid collapse of her carefully constructed life. This morning, she had been a successful marketing executive with a promising career trajectory. Now she was unemployed, potentially connected to an FBI investigation, and completely in the dark about what her father might or might not have done 12 years ago. There's something else. Jennifer continued reluctantly. The security guard who's working today isn't actually a security guard. He's FBI agent Rodriguez. They wanted to observe your reaction when you were denied access to the building. The betrayal hit Camilla like a physical blow. You let them set me up? I had no choice. The warrant was very specific about cooperation. Jennifer reached across the table, but Camilla pulled her hand away. I'm sorry, Camilla. I really am. You're a good employee and a good person. This whole situation is just impossible. Camilla stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I need to talk to my father. Camilla, wait. Jennifer's voice carried a note of desperation. Be careful what you say to anyone about this. The FBI made it very clear that discussing the investigation could interfere with their work. Are you threatening me now? I'm trying to protect you. The best thing you can do right now is find a lawyer and let them handle any communication with federal agents. As Camilla walked back toward her car, her mind raced through a dozen different scenarios. What could her father have possibly known or done at Patterson Holdings that would attract FBI attention 12 years later? Why had he never mentioned any problems at his previous job? And most importantly, what did Agent Rodriguez hope to find by observing her reaction to being blocked from her own workplace? Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Ms. Richardson, this is Agent Rodriguez. We need to speak with you at your earliest convenience. Please call this number to schedule an appointment. Camilla deleted the message without responding and started her car with shaking hands. She had never needed her father more than she did right now, but she was also terrified of what she might learn when she finally confronted him about Patterson Holdings and the mysterious events that had apparently been lurking in her family's past for over a decade. As she drove toward her childhood neighborhood, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just taken an irreversible turn towards something dark and unknown. The security guard's cold stare, Jennifer's nervous betrayal, and the whispered comments about her father all pointed toward a truth that someone had worked very hard to keep buried. But truth has a way of surfacing when you least expect it, and Camilla was about to discover that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The 30-minute drive to her parents' house felt like the longest journey of Camilla's life. Every red light seemed to last forever, giving her more time to rehearse the conversation she dreaded having.
How do you ask your father if he's been hiding criminal activity for over a decade?
How do you reconcile the man who taught you to ride a bicycle and helped with homework with someone who might be connected to an FBI investigation? James Richardson lived with Camilla's mother, Margaret, in a modest two-story house in Oakwood Hills, a middle-class neighborhood they had moved to after leaving their previous home so abruptly 12 years ago. The house was smaller than their old place, but her parents had made it warm and welcoming, with carefully tended flower gardens and a front porch where they enjoyed their morning coffee together. As Camilla pulled into the familiar driveway, she noticed her father's Toyota Camry was missing from its usual spot. Only her mother's blue Subaru sat in the driveway, looking lonely under the shade of the large oak tree her parents had planted when they first moved in. Margaret Richardson answered the door on the second ring, her face lighting up with the surprised delight that always appeared when one of her children visited unexpectedly. At 62, she still maintained the energetic demeanor that had made her such an effective elementary school teacher for 35 years before her retirement. "Camilla, what a wonderful surprise! Shouldn't you be at work?" The innocent question hit Camilla like a punch to the stomach. How could she explain that she no longer had a job, that federal agents were investigating her family, and that everything her parents had told her about their past might be a carefully constructed lie? "Hi, Mum. Is Dad home? I need to talk to both of you about something important." Margaret's expression shifted from delight to concern in an instant. After 38 years of marriage and raising 3 children, she had developed an almost supernatural ability to detect trouble in her family's voices. "He's at the hardware store picking up some supplies for the back fence." "But sweetheart, you look pale. Come inside and tell me what's wrong." The house smelled like cinnamon and vanilla, the same comforting scent that had welcomed Camilla home from school every day of her childhood. Family photos lined the hallway walls, documenting birthdays, graduations, holidays, and all the ordinary moments that make up a life. But today, those smiling faces in the photographs seemed to be keeping secrets from her. "Mom, I need to ask you about Dad's time at Patterson Holdings." Margaret froze in the middle of pouring 2 glasses of iced tea, the pitcher suspended in mid-air for several seconds before she slowly completed the task. "Why are you asking about that? It was so long ago." "Someone from the FBI contacted my workplace. They're investigating financial irregularities at Patterson Holdings, and Dad's name came up. I've been suspended from my job until their investigation is complete." The glass slipped from Margaret's hand, shattering on the kitchen floor and sending ice cubes skittering across the tile. Neither woman moved to clean up the mess. Instead, they stood staring at each other across a suddenly enormous gulf of unspoken truths. "Oh God," Margaret whispered. "We thought it was over. We thought they would never find out." "Find out what, Mum?" "What actually happened at Patterson Holdings?" Margaret sank into one of the kitchen chairs, her face draining of color. For several long moments, the only sound in the room was the steady tick of the wall clock and the occasional car passing by outside. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of years of carefully guarded secrets. "Your father discovered something at Patterson Holdings. Something terrible. He tried to do the right thing, but it got complicated very quickly. What kind of something? Financial fraud. Millions of dollars being diverted from employee pension funds and charitable donations. Your father was doing a routine audit when he found discrepancies in the accounts. At first, he thought it was just accounting errors, but when he dug deeper, he realized it was deliberate and systematic. Camilla felt her world tilting on its axis. So why didn't he report it? Why didn't he go to the authorities? Margaret's laugh was bitter and hollow. He tried. He went to his supervisor first, then to the company's board of directors. They told him he was mistaken, that he didn't understand the complex financial instruments the company was using. When he persisted, they offered him a promotion and a substantial raise to stop asking questions. But he didn't take it. Your father is many things, but he's not someone who can be bought. He gathered more evidence and took it to the Securities and Exchange Commission. That's when things got really scary. Margaret stood and began absently cleaning up the broken glass, her hands shaking slightly as she worked. 2 days after he filed his complaint with the SEC, someone broke into our old house. They didn't take any valuables, but they went through every piece of paper in your father's home office. A week later, his car tires were slashed. The message was clear. End. Why didn't you call the police? We did. The police said there was no evidence connecting the incidents to Patterson Holdings. They treated it like random crime, even though nothing like that had ever happened in our neighborhood before. Camilla sank into the chair across from her mother, struggling to process this revelation. The father she had always admired for his integrity and moral courage had actually been a whistleblower who had tried to expose corporate fraud. But somehow, that made his current situation even more confusing. If Dad was trying to do the right thing, why is the FBI investigating him now? Margaret's expression darkened further. Because 3 weeks after he filed his complaint, the evidence disappeared from the SEC's offices, all of it. The original documents, the copies, even the digital files. Someone with significant access and influence made sure that your father's complaint vanished without a trace. Are you saying someone at the SEC was corrupt? We don't know. The SEC investigator assigned to the case claimed that no complaint had ever been filed. Your father's contact there suddenly stopped returning his phone calls. When he went to their offices in person, security escorted him out of the building. The front door opened and closed, followed by the sound of her father's footsteps in the hallway. Margaret? I got the fence posts, but I think we're going to need more concrete than I originally thought. James Richardson appeared in the kitchen doorway carrying a small bag from the hardware store. He was still a handsome man at 65, with silver hair and the kind of solid, dependable presence that had always made Camilla feel safe. But today, seeing him through the lens of everything she had just learned, he looked older and more fragile than she remembered. Camilla, what brings you by on a Tuesday morning? His smile faltered as he took in his wife's pale face and the broken glass scattered around her feet. What's wrong? Dad, we need to talk about Patterson Holdings. The bag slipped from James's hands, landing on the floor with a dull thud. For a moment, he looked exactly like the man her mother had described. Someone who had tried to do the right thing, only to watch the powerful forces arrayed against him make his evidence disappear. They found you, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. The FBI suspended me from my job this morning. They want to talk to me about your time at Patterson Holdings. James pulled out a chair and sat down heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 65 years. I was hoping this day would never come. We changed our names after we moved here. Not legally, just socially. We started using your mother's maiden name instead of mine for utilities, credit cards, anything that might show up in database searches. You changed your names? Richardson is your mother's maiden name. For 12 years, we've been living as James and Margaret Richardson instead of James and Margaret Patterson. Camilla felt like she was falling down a rabbit hole. Patterson? Our real name is Patterson? As in Patterson Holdings? My brother Daniel founded the company in the 1980s. I was one of the original employees, and I owned a small percentage of the company's stock. When I discovered the fraud, I wasn't just threatening to expose corporate misconduct. I was threatening to expose my own family. The kitchen fell silent, except for the relentless ticking of the clock. Camilla stared at her father, trying to reconcile this new information with everything she thought she knew about her family's history. Her uncle Daniel, whom she had never met and who her parents claimed had died when she was young, wasn't dead at all. He was the founder and presumably the CEO of Patterson Holdings, the company where massive financial fraud had taken place under his leadership. Uncle Daniel is alive, as far as I know. We haven't spoken since I left the company. When the evidence disappeared and the SEC investigation was buried, he made it very clear that my family's safety depended on my permanent silence.
He threatened you?
Not directly, but the break-in, the slashed tires, the mysterious problems with our mortgage application. They all stopped when I agreed to resign quietly and disappear. We sold our house, moved across town, and started using your mother's maiden name. I've been doing freelance consulting work ever since, staying far away from any company that might have connections to Patterson Holdings. Margaret reached across the table and took her husband's hand. We thought we had protected you children from all of this. We never imagined that your job would somehow connect back to Patterson Holdings. How could my job connect back to a company Dad left 12 years ago? James ran his hand through his silver hair, a gesture Camilla recognized from her childhood whenever he was trying to solve a particularly difficult problem. Blackstone Industries has been slowly acquiring Patterson Holdings assets for the past 5 years. They've been very quiet about it, probably to avoid drawing attention to Patterson's history. But if the FBI is investigating the original fraud, they're going to look at every company that benefited from Patterson's dirty money. So I'm guilty by association? Worse than that, James said grimly. If Blackstone Industries knowingly purchased companies with assets derived from fraudulent activities, they could be charged as accessories after the fact. Your employment there makes you a potential witness to any ongoing criminal activity. Camilla's phone buzzed with another text message. This time it was from Agent Rodriguez. Miss Richardson, we're prepared to offer you immunity in exchange for your cooperation. Time is a factor. Please respond within 24 hours. She showed the message to her parents, watching as their faces registered a mixture of fear and resignation. They're going to pressure you to provide information about Blackstone's operations, James said. Information that could incriminate people you work with, people you consider friends. But I don't know anything about financial fraud at Blackstone. I work in marketing. Marketing departments often handle budgets, vendor relationships, and financial documentation, Margaret pointed out. You probably have access to more financial information than you realize. Camilla thought about her daily responsibilities at Blackstone Industries. She did indeed handle vendor contracts, budget reports, and expense documentation. Her computer system access included financial databases that she used to verify budget allocations and track spending patterns. Information that had seemed routine and boring yesterday now took on an entirely different significance. What should I do? James was quiet for a long time, staring out the kitchen window at the neighbors' houses where normal families were living normal lives without FBI investigations hanging over their heads. 12 years ago, I thought I could take on a powerful corporation and win. I thought truth and justice meant something in the face of corruption and intimidation. I was wrong. But maybe you don't have to make the same mistake I did. Are you telling me to cooperate with the FBI? I'm telling you to protect yourself first. Get a lawyer before you talk to anyone. Don't trust the FBI agents. Don't trust your former employer. And don't trust anyone who says they're looking out for your best interests. As Camilla prepared to leave her parents' house, she realized that everything she thought she knew about her family's history had been carefully constructed fiction. Her father wasn't just a former financial analyst who had changed jobs for better opportunities. He was a whistleblower whose attempt to expose corporate fraud had been systematically destroyed by powerful people who were willing to use intimidation and possibly violence to protect their secrets. And now, 12 years later, those same secrets were threatening to destroy her life just as they had nearly destroyed her parents' lives. The difference was that this time, the FBI was involved, and they seemed to believe that she held the key to finally exposing the truth about Patterson Holdings and its corporate successes. But truth, as her family had learned the hard way, was a dangerous commodity when powerful people had invested everything in keeping it buried, and Agent Rodriguez's offer of immunity suggested that the stakes were higher than anyone had yet revealed. Camilla spent the rest of Tuesday afternoon researching criminal defense attorneys, trying to find someone with experience in federal investigations and corporate fraud cases. The internet searches felt surreal. Words like immunity deals, federal witness protection, and corporate whistleblower had never been part of her vocabulary before this morning. Now they were potentially the most important phrases in her life. By Wednesday evening, she had hired Amanda Chen, a former federal prosecutor who had started her own practice, specializing in defending clients caught up in government investigations. Amanda's office was located in a sleek downtown building, and her credentials were impressive enough to justify the substantial retainer fee that had immediately decimated Camilla's savings account. The first thing you need to understand, Amanda had explained during their initial consultation, is that federal agents are trained to make every conversation feel casual and friendly while they gather evidence that could be used against you later. Never speak to Agent Rodriguez or anyone else from law enforcement without me present. Thursday morning brought an unexpected phone call from Marcus Williams, the regular security guard who had been mysteriously absent from the Meridian Corporate Tower on Tuesday. Ms. Richardson? This is Marcus from the building security desk. I hope you don't mind me calling, but I got your number from the employee directory. I heard about what happened on Tuesday, and I think we need to talk. Camilla hesitated. Amanda had been very clear about not discussing the investigation with anyone. But Marcus had always been kind to her, and his voice carried an urgency that made her curious. Marcus, I'm not supposed to talk about the situation at work. I'm not calling about work. I'm calling about your father. That stopped Camilla cold. You know my father? Not personally, but I know what he tried to do 12 years ago. And I know why Agent Rodriguez was so interested in watching your reaction on Tuesday. How could you possibly know about my father? Marcus was quiet for a moment, and she could hear traffic noise in the background, suggesting he was calling from somewhere outside the building. Because I have the evidence your father thought was destroyed. The phone nearly slipped from Camilla's hands. What are you talking about? Meet me at Riverside Park at 2 o'clock. The bench near the old oak tree by the pond. Come alone, and don't tell anyone where you're going. If you're being watched, which you probably are, take a roundabout route and make sure you're not followed. The line went dead before Camilla could ask any of the dozen questions racing through her mind. She stared at her phone, wondering if she had just received the call that would finally provide answers to her family's 12-year nightmare, or if she was being drawn into something even more dangerous than she had already experienced. Amanda Chen had given her strict instructions to call immediately if anyone contacted her about the case, but something in Marcus's voice had convinced her that this wasn't a trap. He had sounded scared, not threatening. More importantly, he had sounded like someone who genuinely wanted to help her rather than manipulate her. Against her lawyer's advice and her own better judgment, Camilla decided to meet Marcus at the park. Riverside Park was a sprawling green space on the edge of the city, popular with jobbers, families with young children, and anyone seeking a peaceful escape from urban life. The bench near the old oak tree was isolated enough to provide privacy for conversation, while remaining public enough to feel relatively safe. Marcus was already waiting when Camilla arrived, looking uncomfortable in civilian clothes instead of his usual security uniform. At 55, he had the weathered appearance of someone who had worked physical jobs his entire life. But his eyes held an intelligence that suggested there was much more to him than his job title indicated. "Thank you for coming," he said as she approached the bench. "I wasn't sure you would. You said you have evidence related to my father." "What kind of evidence?" Marcus looked around the park carefully before reaching into a small backpack beside him. "Before I show you anything, you need to understand how I came to have this information. It's going to sound unbelievable, but I need you to trust me. I'm not sure I trust anyone anymore." "Fair enough. But I'm hoping that what I'm about to tell you will help you understand why your father's investigation was buried and why the FBI is suddenly interested in you after all these years." Marcus pulled a manila envelope from his backpack, holding it carefully as if it contained something fragile and precious. "I wasn't always a security guard. 20 years ago, I was a criminal investigator for the Securities and Exchange Commission. I was the agent assigned to investigate your father's complaint about Patterson Holdings." Camilla felt her heart skip several beats. "You were the investigator who disappeared his evidence?" "I was the investigator whose evidence was stolen, along with my career and nearly my life." Marcus's voice carried a bitterness that spoke to years of anger and frustration. 3 days after your father met with me and provided his documentation of the fraud at Patterson Holdings, my supervisor told me the case was being transferred to a different department. When I asked for clarification, I was told that no such case had ever existed. My mother said the evidence disappeared from the SEC offices. It didn't disappear. It was deliberately destroyed by people within the SEC who were being paid to protect Patterson Holdings from investigation. When I tried to protest the decision, I was accused of falsifying government documents and threatened with criminal prosecution. Marcus opened the envelope and pulled out a thick stack of papers, photocopies that looked yellowed with age. But your father was smart. Before he turned over his original documents to the SEC, he made copies and gave them to me privately. He suspected that powerful people were involved in the fraud, and he wanted to make sure the evidence couldn't be completely destroyed. Camilla stared at the papers in Marcus's hands, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. "You've had my father's evidence for 12 years? I've been carrying it around like a guilty secret. After I was forced to resign from the SEC, I tried to interest journalists in the story, but no one would touch it. Patterson Holdings had too much influence, too many connections to powerful people in government and media. I finally gave up and took a job as a security guard, figuring I would live out the rest of my working years in obscurity. So why are you showing me this now? Because Agent Rodriguez isn't really investigating Patterson Holdings, he's investigating Blackstone Industries, and he thinks you're the key to proving that Blackstone knowingly purchased companies with assets derived from fraudulent activities. But he doesn't have the original evidence of the fraud itself. Without that, he can't prove that Blackstone's acquisitions were based on dirty money. Marcus handed her the stack of papers. This is the proof that Patterson Holdings systematically diverted money from employee pension funds and charitable donations into offshore accounts controlled by company executives. It's also proof that the SEC investigation was deliberately sabotaged by corrupt officials who were paid to make the evidence disappear. Camilla flipped through the pages with trembling hands. Financial spreadsheets, bank statements, email communications, and handwritten notes in her father's careful script detailed a complex scheme that had apparently stolen millions of dollars over several years. The evidence was thorough, methodical, and damning. Why are you giving this to me instead of taking it to the FBI yourself? Because I'm a disgraced former SEC investigator with a personal grudge against the system. My credibility is zero. But you're the daughter of the original whistleblower, and you have inside knowledge of Blackstone's operations. Agent Rodriguez will believe this evidence if it comes from you. Are you asking me to become an informant? I'm asking you to finish what your father started. This evidence can finally expose the truth about Patterson Holdings and everyone who helped cover up their crimes. It can also protect you from being used as a scapegoat in the FBI's investigation of Blackstone. Camilla thought about her father's defeated expression when he described how his attempt to expose corporate fraud had been systematically destroyed. She thought about her mother's fear when federal agents had suddenly reappeared in their lives after 12 years of careful anonymity. Most of all, she thought about the injustice of powerful people stealing money that belonged to workers and charities, while the government officials who were supposed to protect the public looked the other way. If I take this evidence to Agent Rodriguez, what happens to my father? Will he be charged with something? Your father might be called as a witness, but he won't be charged with any crimes. The statute of limitations has expired for most of the original fraud, and he was clearly trying to expose wrongdoing rather than participate in it. What about you? Won't you be in danger if this evidence surfaces? Marcus smiled grimly. I've been living with the fear of retaliation for 12 years. At this point, I'd rather take the risk of doing the right thing than continue carrying this burden alone. As Camilla carefully placed the evidence back in the envelope, she realized that her decision would affect not just her own future, but also the lives of everyone connected to Patterson Holdings and Blackstone Industries. Employees who might lose their jobs if Blackstone was prosecuted, executives who might face criminal charges, and family members who had been living in fear for over a decade. There's something else you should know, Marcus added. Agent Rodriguez isn't working alone. This investigation involves multiple federal agencies, and they have evidence that the money stolen from Patterson Holdings was used to fund other criminal activities, including money laundering and tax evasion. How big is this case? Big enough that powerful people are still willing to do whatever it takes to keep it buried. The fact that they suspended you from your job instead of simply questioning you suggests that they're worried about what you might discover if you started looking through Blackstone's financial records. Are you saying Blackstone is actively involved in criminal activities? I'm saying that Blackstone may have purchased Patterson Holdings assets without doing proper due diligence about where those assets came from. Whether that was intentional or negligent is something the FBI will have to determine. As they prepared to leave the park, Marcus grabbed Camilla's arm gently. Be very careful who you trust from this point forward. The people who covered up Patterson's crimes 12 years ago are still in positions of power, and they have a lot to lose if this evidence becomes public.
How do I know I can trust you? Because I've spent 12 years of my life guarding the truth instead of profiting from lies.
And because your father trusted me enough to give me copies of his evidence, even when he had no reason to believe anyone in government was still honest. As Camilla drove home from the park, the envelope containing her father's evidence felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She understood now why Agent Rodriguez had been so interested in her reaction to being blocked from her office building. He had been hoping that stress and confusion might make her more willing to cooperate with his investigation. But what Agent Rodriguez didn't know was that the evidence he needed to make his case had been in the possession of a building security guard for over a decade, carefully preserved by a man whose career had been destroyed for trying to do the right thing. The question now was whether she had the courage to finish what her father had started, knowing that powerful people had already demonstrated their willingness to destroy anyone who threatened their secrets. The envelope in her hands contained the power to finally expose the truth about Patterson Holdings. but it also contained the potential to put her entire family in danger. Tomorrow, she would have to decide whether justice was worth the risk. That evening, Camilla spread her father's evidence across her dining room table like pieces of a complex puzzle. Even with her limited financial background, the pattern of fraud was clear and systematic. Bank statements showed regular transfers from Patterson Holdings accounts to various offshore entities. Email communications revealed executives discussing ways to redirect charitable donations and optimize pension fund allocations. Most damning of all were handwritten notes that appeared to be meeting minutes, describing plans to neutralize the Richardson problem and ensure SEC cooperation. Her phone rang just after midnight. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but something compelled her to answer. Camilla Richardson? The voice was unfamiliar, professional but nervous. Who is this? My name is David Kim. I'm an investigative journalist with the Washington Herald. I understand you recently came into possession of some very interesting documents. Camilla felt her blood turn cold. I don't know what you're talking about. Ms. Richardson, I've been investigating Patterson Holdings for 3 years. Your father contacted me briefly in 2019, but he was too scared to provide any concrete evidence. If you have what I think you have, we can finally expose this story. How did you know to call me? Marcus Williams contacted me yesterday. He said you now have access to the original SEC evidence that disappeared 12 years ago. Camilla realized that Marcus had been busier than he had let on during their meeting at the park. Are you working with the FBI? Absolutely not. The FBI investigation is focused on prosecuting individuals. I'm interested in exposing the institutional corruption that allowed this fraud to continue for years. What's the difference? The difference is that the FBI will offer plea deals to smaller players in exchange for testimony against bigger targets. The really powerful people, the ones who orchestrated the cover-up, will never see the inside of a courtroom. But a well-researched newspaper investigation can expose everyone involved, regardless of their political connections.
David Kim's words echoed in Camilla's mind as she considered her options.
Agent Rodriguez wanted her cooperation to build criminal cases against specific individuals.
Marcus Williams wanted her to provide evidence that would vindicate his destroyed career. Now David Kim was asking her to help expose a story that could potentially bring down powerful figures in government and business. I need to think about this. I understand. But you should know that you're not the only person with evidence about Patterson Holdings. Over the past 3 years, I've interviewed dozens of former employees who were afraid to speak publicly. If you come forward, others will follow. After David Kim hung up, Camilla couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about her father's defeated expression when he described how his evidence had disappeared and his investigation had been buried. For 12 years, her family had lived with the knowledge that criminals had escaped justice and that the people responsible for protecting the public had been corrupted or intimidated into silence. Friday morning brought an unexpected visitor. Camilla was drinking coffee and reviewing the evidence for the 100th time when her doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw a well-dressed woman in her 50s holding a briefcase and looking distinctly uncomfortable. Ms. Richardson? My name is Linda Morrison. I'm an attorney, representing Blackstone Industries. I'd like to speak with you about your recent suspension. Against her better judgment, Camilla opened the door. Linda Morrison had the polished appearance of a high-powered corporate lawyer, but her eyes carried the same nervousness that seemed to affect everyone connected to this case. I'm sorry, but my lawyer advised me not to speak with anyone from Blackstone without her present. I understand your caution, but I'm not here to discuss anything that might compromise you legally. I'm here to make you an offer that I think you'll find very attractive. Curiosity won out over caution. What kind of offer? Blackstone Industries would like to offer you a substantial settlement in exchange for your agreement not to pursue any legal action related to your suspension. We're prepared to offer you 2 years' salary plus benefits, along with a positive employment reference. Camilla stared at the lawyer, trying to process why a company would offer such a generous settlement to someone who hadn't even threatened to sue them. Why would Blackstone want to pay me anything? I haven't filed any complaints or threatened any legal action. Consider it a gesture of goodwill. Your suspension was based on circumstances beyond your control, and we want to minimize any hardship you might experience as a result. What's the catch? Linda Morrison's professional smile faltered slightly. The settlement would include a standard non-disclosure agreement. You would agree not to discuss your employment at Blackstone or any information you might have gained during your time there. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. Blackstone wasn't offering her money out of generosity. They were offering her money to buy her silence about whatever she might know or discover about their connection to Patterson Holdings. How much money are we talking about? $250,000, paid immediately upon signing the agreement. The amount was staggering. It represented more than 4 years of her current salary and would provide financial security that she had never experienced before. But it also represented the exact same type of corruption that had destroyed her father's investigation 12 years ago. Powerful people using money to silence anyone who might threaten their interests. I need to discuss this with my lawyer.
Of course.
But I should mention that this offer is time-sensitive. We need your answer by Monday morning. After Linda Morrison left, Camilla called Amanda Chan and described the settlement offer. Her lawyer's response was immediate and emphatic. They're trying to buy your silence before you realize how valuable your information might be. The fact that they're offering this much money suggests they're terrified of what you might know or discover. But I don't know anything about criminal activity at Blackstone. Maybe not directly. But you had access to financial systems and vendor relationships that could reveal connections between Blackstone and Patterson Holdings. Even routine marketing documents might contain information that could expose money laundering or fraud. So you think I should reject the settlement? I think you should understand what you're giving up before you make any decisions. $250,000 is a lot of money, but if your information is valuable enough to help the FBI build major criminal cases, you might be eligible for much larger whistleblower rewards. That afternoon, Camilla made a decision that would change the trajectory of the entire investigation. Instead of waiting for Agent Rodriguez to contact her again, she called the number he had provided and arranged to meet with him on Saturday morning. Agent Rodriguez suggested they meet at a small diner on the outskirts of town, away from the city center, where they might be observed by people connected to either Blackstone Industries or Patterson Holdings. When Camilla arrived, she found him sitting in a corner booth, looking less like the intimidating federal agent who had blocked her from her office, and more like a tired man who was trying to solve a complex puzzle. Ms. Richardson, thank you for calling. I was beginning to think you might not be interested in cooperating with our investigation. I'm interested in the truth, Camilla replied, sliding into the booth across from him. But I need to understand what's really going on before I commit to anything. Agent Rodriguez nodded approvingly. Smart approach. Let me be completely honest with you about what we're investigating and why we believe you can help us. He pulled out a tablet computer and showed her a complex organizational chart that mapped connections between Patterson Holdings, Blackstone Industries, and more than a dozen other companies. 3 years ago, we began investigating reports that money stolen from Patterson Holdings was being used to fund a network of shell companies involved in money laundering, tax evasion, and political corruption. Political corruption? Politicians, judges, and regulatory officials who took bribes to protect Patterson Holdings and its business partners from investigation. The corruption network extends far beyond corporate fraud into the highest levels of government. Camilla studied the organizational chart, recognizing several company names that had appeared in Blackstone's vendor databases. How does Blackstone fit into this? Blackstone has been purchasing assets from companies connected to Patterson Holdings for 5 years. Either they're knowingly participating in money laundering, or they've been deceived into buying assets with fraudulent origins. We need to determine which scenario is accurate. And you think I can help you figure that out? Your access to Blackstone's financial systems and vendor relationships could provide the missing links we need to trace the flow of money from Patterson Holdings through various shell companies to legitimate businesses. Agent Rodriguez leaned forward across the table. But there's something else you should know. We have reason to believe that some of the people involved in covering up Patterson's original fraud are still in positions of power and are actively working to sabotage our current investigation. What kind of people? Government officials who took bribes 12 years ago to make evidence disappear. They're now senior executives at other agencies, federal judges, and congressional staff members. They have everything to lose if this investigation succeeds. Camilla felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the full scope of what she was being asked to participate in. This wasn't just about corporate fraud or financial crimes. It was about exposing a network of corruption that reached into the highest levels of government and threatened some of the most powerful people in the country. What happens if I agree to cooperate? You'll be provided with federal protection and immunity from prosecution for any crimes you might have unknowingly participated in during your employment at Blackstone. If your information leads to successful prosecutions, you'll be eligible for substantial whistleblower rewards. And if I refuse? Agent Rodriguez's expression grew more serious. Then you remain a potential target for prosecution as an accessory to money laundering, and you'll have no protection from retaliation by the people who are trying to keep this investigation from succeeding. As Camilla drove home from the diner, she realized that her decision about whether to cooperate with the FBI would affect not just her own future, but also the outcome of an investigation that could potentially expose decades of corruption at the highest levels of American business and government. The evidence her father had gathered 12 years ago was finally going to see the light of day, but only if she had the courage to take on the same powerful interests that had already demonstrated their willingness to destroy anyone who threatened their secrets. The envelope containing her father's documents sat on her passenger seat, representing both the key to finally achieving justice and the potential beginning of a battle against people who had unlimited resources and no scruples about how they used their power to protect themselves. Saturday night, Camilla sat at her kitchen table with 3 different paths spread out before her. The settlement agreement from Blackstone Industries promised immediate financial security and an end to her involvement in the investigation. The evidence from her father offered the chance to finally expose the truth about Patterson Holdings, but came with significant personal risk. Agent Rodriguez's offer of federal protection provided safety but required her to become a government informant against her former employer. As she wrestled with these impossible choices, her phone rang. The caller ID showed her parents' home number. Camilla? Her father's voice carried a weight she had never heard before. "We need you to come over right away. Something's happened." "What kind of something? Just come. And bring everything Marcus gave you." The drive to her parents' house took 15 minutes that felt like hours. Every traffic light, every stop sign seemed designed to delay her arrival and increase her anxiety. When she finally pulled into the driveway, she noticed an unfamiliar black sedan parked across the street. The kind of nondescript vehicle that federal agents favored. Margaret Richardson met her at the front door, her face pale but determined. "They're in the living room," she said quietly. "They've been here for an hour." "Who's been here?" "People who want to help us finish this once and for all." Camilla followed her mother into the living room and stopped short. Marcus Williams sat in one of the armchairs, looking more serious than she had ever seen him. Beside him on the couch was David Kim, the investigative journalist who had called her earlier in the week, and standing near the window, scanning the street for potential surveillance, was Agent Rodriguez. "Miss Richardson," Agent Rodriguez said, turning from the window. "We've all been comparing notes, and we think it's time you understood the full scope of what we're dealing with." James Richardson gestured for his daughter to sit down. "Camilla, what I told you about my time at Patterson Holdings was true, but it wasn't complete. There's more to the story, and it's more dangerous than I let on." "What kind of more?" Marcus leaned forward in his chair. "Your father didn't just discover financial fraud at Patterson Holdings. He discovered that the company was being used as a front for an international money laundering operation connected to organized crime." "Organized crime?" Camilla felt like she was falling down a rabbit hole that kept getting deeper and more surreal. David Kim opened a laptop computer and showed her a series of bank transfer records. Patterson Holdings was laundering money for several crime syndicates, disguising criminal proceeds as legitimate business income. The money your father thought was being stolen from pension funds and charities was actually being mixed with dirty money to make it appear clean. "How long has this been going on?" "At least 15 years, probably longer," Agent Rodriguez replied. "The criminal organization behind it has connections throughout the financial industry, law enforcement, and government. They've been using companies like Patterson Holdings to legitimize billions of dollars in criminal proceeds." James Richardson's expression was grim as he continued the explanation. "When I discovered the evidence 12 years ago, I thought I was exposing corporate fraud. I didn't realize I was threatening to expose an operation that generated hundreds of millions of dollars annually for some very dangerous people. That's why the evidence disappeared so quickly," Marcus added. "And why I was threatened with prosecution if I continued investigating. The corruption wasn't limited to a few SEC officials taking bribes. It involved people throughout the federal government who were being paid to protect the money laundering operation." Camilla stared at the assembled group, trying to process the magnitude of what they were describing. "Are you saying that Blackstone Industries is also involved in money laundering?" "We're saying that Blackstone may have been deliberately targeted as the next front for the operation," Agent Rodriguez explained. "The criminal organization behind Patterson Holdings needed a new company to launder money through after Patterson came under scrutiny. Blackstone's acquisition of Patterson assets wasn't random, it was orchestrated." "By who?" David Kim turned his laptop screen toward her again, this time showing a photograph of a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit. "Daniel Patterson, your father's brother and the founder of Patterson Holdings. He's not just a corrupt businessman. He's the architect of the entire money laundering network. The room fell silent as Camilla absorbed this final piece of the puzzle. Her uncle Daniel, whom she had been told was dead, was actually alive and running a criminal organization that had destroyed her father's career and was now threatening to destroy her life. He knows you have the evidence, Agent Rodriguez continued. The settlement offer from Blackstone wasn't just about buying your silence. It was about determining whether you pose a threat to the operation. How could he possibly know what I have? Marcus looked uncomfortable as he answered. Because I told him. You what? I contacted Daniel Patterson yesterday and told him that his brother's evidence had survived and was now in your possession. I told him that unless he agreed to surrender peacefully and cooperate with federal authorities, the evidence would be turned over to journalists and law enforcement simultaneously. Are you insane? You just told a criminal organization that I have evidence against them? I told them that multiple people have copies of the evidence and that harming you would only accelerate its release. It's called forcing their hand. Agent Rodriguez nodded approvingly. Marcus's call accomplished two things. First, it confirmed that Daniel Patterson is still actively involved in criminal activities. He took the call and engaged in negotiations rather than claiming ignorance. Second, it forced him to make a choice between attempting to silence you and attempting to negotiate a plea agreement. And what choice did he make? He wants to meet with you, James Richardson said quietly. Tonight. He says he's prepared to provide information about the entire money laundering network in exchange for guarantees that his cooperation will be taken into account during sentencing. Camilla felt like the room was spinning. He wants to meet with me. Why me? Because you're the only person in this room who can't be accused of having a personal agenda, David Kim explained. Agent Rodriguez is a federal agent seeking prosecutions. Marcus is a former SEC investigator seeking vindication. Your father was the original whistleblower seeking justice. But you're an innocent party who got caught up in this situation through no fault of your own. He thinks you'll be more objective about evaluating his offer, Agent Rodriguez added. And he's probably right. You don't have years of anger and frustration clouding your judgment. Where does he want to meet? The Riverside Hotel downtown, room 1247. He'll be there at 10 o'clock tonight with his attorney. Camilla looked around the room at the four people who had become the most important figures in her life over the past week. What happens if I go to this meeting? You'll finally hear the complete truth about what happened to your family 12 years ago, Marcus replied. And you'll have the chance to help bring down a criminal organization that has operated with impunity for over a decade. What happens if I don't go? Then Daniel Patterson disappears. The money laundering operation moves to a different location, and we're back where we started, with evidence but no way to prosecute the people at the top of the organization. Agent Rodriguez said. And what happens to me in either scenario? If you help us conclude this investigation successfully, you'll be protected by federal law enforcement and eligible for substantial whistleblower awards, Agent Rodriguez promised. If you refuse to help, you'll remain a potential target for retaliation, and you'll always wonder whether you could have made a difference. 3 hours later, Camilla stood outside room 1247 at the Riverside Hotel, flanked by Agent Rodriguez and Marcus Williams.
David Kim was positioned in the lobby with a photographer, ready to document whatever emerged from the meeting.
Her father had wanted to come, but they had all agreed that the confrontation between the two brothers should happen under more controlled circumstances. Daniel Patterson opened the door on the first knock. At 68, he looked remarkably similar to her father, with the same silver hair and solid build. But his eyes held a coldness that she had never seen in her father's face, and his expensive clothing and jewelry spoke to wealth that had been acquired through methods her father would never have considered. Camilla, he said, his voice carrying a mixture of warmth and calculation. You look so much like your mother did at your age. I'm not here for a family reunion. No, I suppose you're not. Please, come in. The hotel room was actually a suite, with a sitting area where Daniel's attorney waited with several briefcases full of documents. Agent Rodriguez and Marcus took seats near the window, while Camilla sat across from her uncle, studying the face of the man who had nearly destroyed her family. I suppose you hate me, Daniel said, without preamble. I don't know you well enough to hate you. But I hate what you did to my father. Your father was always too idealistic for his own good. He thought he could change the world by exposing one company's financial irregularities. He never understood that he was threatening an operation that employed hundreds of people and generated billions of dollars in economic activity. Economic activity built on crime. Economic activity that provided jobs, funded charitable causes, and contributed to economic growth. The fact that some of the money originated from questionable sources was less important than the legitimate purposes it ultimately served. Agent Rodriguez interrupted the philosophical debate. Mr. Patterson, we're here to discuss your offer of cooperation, not to justify your criminal activities. Daniel's attorney opened one of the briefcases and pulled out a thick folder. My client is prepared to provide complete documentation of the money laundering network, including names of all participants in government and law enforcement who facilitated the operation. In exchange for what? Marcus asked. Immunity from prosecution for my client and his immediate family members. He's willing to plead guilty to conspiracy charges but wants guarantees that he won't face more serious charges related to racketeering or organized crime. Agent Rodriguez shook his head.